What up, bros? We are here at Big Data University's Spark Fundamentals 1 course, and I wanted to go over just how to get started downloading Spark because, I know everyone's super psyched to crunch some big data with this powerful new processing engine that is Apache Spark, the Hadoop killer, blah, blah, blah. We're psyched. Let's get going. All right, let's download this thing. Let's get started. Oh, wait. Option 1, or step 1 here, option 1, not step 1, kind of weird. How do we have option 1 before step 1? I don't fucking know. Use the Docker image with Spark 1.3.1. So let me access this Docker image. Like, wait, what the fuck is Docker? I hear that all the time. Everyone's talking about Docker. Docker this, it's replacing all these virtualization technologies that run, in the cloud. So it's like, oh, I want to use this. Now I can get, two birds with one stone. Let me learn something about Docker. Just FYI, in my opinion, in my very, uninformed, kind of stupid opinion, Docker is a way of kind of virtualizing a level of abstraction. Whew, that was a tough one. Abstraction above the VM, if that makes any sense. So, your virtual machine is a kind of like a computer as software. But when I provision a VM on my computer or on a server, I still have to specify, hey, I got to give it 2 cores. I got to give it X amount, 4 gigs of RAM, I got to go, or probably more in a production system. I got to give it so much hard drive, and I'm actually kind of carving up the computer that my VM is sitting on, and I'm giving it those resources. And even though this isn't a physical computer, it still gets those resources, kind of whether it needs them or not. So the nice thing about Docker, as I understand it, is that it will kind of provision those resources as it needs them. So I can say, okay, you're now this image, this level of abstraction above the VM, and if you need more RAM, you're going to kind of take it, and if you need more disk, you're going to take it. And please take that with a grain of salt because I may have that totally wrong. But anyway, I was like, hey, you know what? I want to do this Docker thing, and go figure. Big Data, you guys put together a lot of nice videos for going through the VMs, but they didn't put together any videos for installing Docker. And since I wasn't familiar with it, I fucked it up a few times, so I thought I might share this to maybe help somebody through it. So step 1, let's click on access the Docker image. We're gonna go through several different web pages here, and hopefully we'll figure it out. So I think this is the little confusing part for me right off the bat was, this image. So what we learn here is that basically I think there's a Docker host or some kind of thing that runs Docker images, and then the Docker image is kind of like our actual VM. So just like with VMware Player we download this big ass VM, and we run it through VMware Player. We're going to download this big-ass Docker image, and we're going to run it through some kind of Docker host. And so another thing that's a little odd, Docker image seems to get used the same way as a Docker container. So it's like Docker containers require a Docker host to run. If you like to use this image, so it's like, is it an image, is it a container? I hear container more often, but, it seems like they're using it interchangeably. If you know the answer, please leave a comment, let me know, because I'm ignorant. So I'm on Windows. I'm going to follow the instructions here, which is going to open up another link. And now we're going to download the Docker host, I think. And so one thing that pisses me off is that step 1 here is a link to the actual installer somewhere else. And then step 2 is saying, okay, after you've downloaded the installer, here's what you do. I kind of wish that was more contained. Maybe I'm being picky, but I find that a little frustrating because now I have to click this link to go over to the GitHub repo so that we can download what I think you guys want. What I wanted was the Docker installer exe. So for Windows users, in my opinion, if someone gives you an executable, which is it's going to step you through how to download the software, go for it. You get the graphical user interface, the GUI. You can get the source code if you want to be hardcore, but that's not me. I'm not a hardcore kind of guy. I'll take the GUI every day. So we just came from, I'm assuming I'm going to pause for a second. I'm not going to pause. You may need to pause, download that fucking exe file. When it finishes, it's not huge, but it may take a minute. When it finishes, we're going to step through these things. And the key step here is in step 2, run the installer and select all of the components. So you want this Docker client. I think that's supposed to be for Windows. VirtualBox. If you have VirtualBox installed, you don't need to select it. Same thing with Git for Windows. So I had Git for Windows installed, and I had VirtualBox installed. I didn't check those boxes, and my installation went well. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you probably don't have Git for Windows installed. You may not have VirtualBox. You might. But go ahead and check those. But if you do have them, don't worry about it. You don't have to install them again. Like it'll work. So at that point, then they're going to tell you to just double click on this boot to Docker icon over here, and it'll kick off this little shell. And I think what it's using here is it's using your Git shell. So Git will give you a Linux shell, and it's gonna use that. So at this point, this is another thing that I get frustrated with. Now we have to go back to the first pop-up that told us, if I can find it, which told us, okay, now we're going to pull down the Docker image. So we've opened the Docker host. We're going to pull down the image, just like a git command or a git pull. And this command, Docker pull, and then we're providing this path, Big Data University /Spark. Note, when you do this, it's going to take a hell of a long time. It's just like downloading a VM from any of these other sites. It's a pretty big file. I think it's like 4 or 5 gigs. The other thing that was just weird when I downloaded it was that my shell, the way the standard out was coming, so as messages were getting printed to the screen, they went up instead of down. So I have no idea what that means. And it may sound weird to describe it. Basically, like, messages were working their way up the screen. And there's this cryptic note somewhere in one of the docs where they say something along the lines of, if your screen freezes, don't worry about it. Like, it'll be okay. Hit enter to return to the shell. Don't do that. I wouldn't worry about that while you're actually downloading the image. But I think it's kind of indicative of the fact that there's there might be a little odd behavior with the Docker image, with the actual shell, not with the image. That's kind of a mistake on my part, but just with the shell's behavior. So, just FYI. But here's my big bone to pick. So, if you're going to remember one thing in this video, please remember this. I hope you have more luck with this command than I do. Or I did. So I ran this, right? We downloaded the image. It took 45 minutes or so. I got this Docker image. Now it's time to run it. And as we run it, we're passing in these commands. And one of the commands is we're naming the container. We're saying which container we want. We're giving it this argument, the latest. And then this is the part where my script, or where I saw an error in the shell, which is where we're passing in a command to run a shell script. And this, you'll notice for Windows users, you're probably not used to the way these slashes look, right? Or this file ending .sh, because that's, for shell, it's a Linux script. So we're passing in a command to this image, which is running on a Linux operating system, and we're passing that into this Docker container initial, where we're saying, like, run this and run this script to get going. I couldn't get this command to run, and what the error I was receiving was basically saying, I can't find this Etsy directory and this file, bootstrap.sh, which to me meant it was looking in my actual Docker container where I was, instead of in the image where I wanted it to be. If that distinction doesn't make sense, I'll just repeat it one more time. I don't think this worked for me because it was looking for this file, this directory in this file, in the image rather than in the container. It's supposed to be looking for it in the image. So I've described this problem enough. If you run this and it works great, then go to step 4. If it doesn't, and this is interesting, there is another set of instructions in getting started, and they'll tell you to run this Docker. You can kind of look and see, maybe they don't tell you, but you can see that they're saying run this Etsy bootstrap command. But you can see here in 1.1, and this is just the first set getting started. I'll go back so we can see. I just got this from lesson 1. Where were we with the input file? Sorry, guys. Getting started. This instructions right here, this PDF file, getting started with Spark lab instructions using the Docker image. You can see that the command they ran was just Docker run space -it big, and then the actual image, and then bash. So then all they're passing in, instead of passing in a script, instead of passing in that Etsy bootstrap, they're just passing in the command bash, I guess, to start the bash shell. And then they run Etsy bootstrap. So if you want to see it in mine, I ran the same thing, Docker run this, that, and then I ran, when it loaded, and it'll take a second, I then ran the Etsy bootstrap to actually kick this off. So I hope that's helpful. I may be a little rushed and a little much, but basically I'd say follow the instructions from the lab, from this file, and I think you'll be okay.